after I'm done, and it won't be an extended period of time, after that, we're going to want to take out our lessons and begin to work on them. Some of you probably already have, and that's fine. But we want to make that work. Let me set this aside here. All right. So, interpreting the book of Revelation. It's not easy. That's why very few pastors get involved in this sort of thing. And it's even more complicated when you think of all the different methods of interpretation. Somebody said that there was a kind of a counter prophecy seminar that was on this week at the, which church was it again? Port City? It's a mega church. Yeah, Port City, okay. So I wish them well. If this man is getting into futurism, the pastor, the presenter, whoever he is, God help him. It's a very complicated way of interpreting prophecy, and we're going to be taking a look at some of those things tonight. So let me, I hope I'm not touching the keys here in any way, but I wanted to put that note aside because it's something I wanted to add. Let's see if we can get this going, Wayne. I'm not used to. There we go. And we're looking at the author of the book of Revelation, who is what? John. Now, what is he known as in the Gospels? John the Beloved. Now, it's in one of the texts, I don't remember which Gospel it's in, it says that he was the one that Jesus loved. Well, Jesus loved all of his apostles. But John was special. It's believed that John was probably younger than the others. We'll see that when we get into how long he lived and what happened to him. And so we're going to take a look at this right now. Let's see here. Okay, he was a prophet. How many books did John write, by the way? Anybody know? He wrote 4, didn't he? He did. So he has a lot to say about prophecy, the book of Revelation being the most obvious. And the book of Revelation is different than his other books. The gospel that he wrote, also the epistles that he wrote, are very different. The one is the story of Jesus from his perspective. The others are the story of the church. The things that he's writing to the churches that he pastored. He's also an author, obviously. He's an evangelist. He's a pastor. John was the pastor of the Ephesus church, which was a major church in the early days of the growing church. He's also one of the 12, of course. Anybody tell me what apostle means? Does anybody remember that from Sunday school, Sabbath school, or something? It means 1 cent. And after Judas, the disciples got together, if you remember that, in the book of Acts. And how did they pick Matthias? Anybody remember? They cast lots. If they'd just been willing to wait a little bit, they would have seen who Jesus' selection was. Who was who? The Apostle Paul. He was selected by Jesus himself, not by throwing dice. You know, Matthias, there's nothing much known about him. He was a disciple of Jesus. Jesus had the 12, and then he had the 120. I would imagine Matthias was one of the 120, and they just let him step up. But it's just a little bit of gospel trivia. Okay, the Apostle John. Where are we going here? Came from a Palestinian family, a Galilean, son of Zebedee, and brother of James. What were they called? Anybody remember? What does that mean? There's nobody here like that, is there? In fact, you find the temperaments of the apostles in every group of Christian people. Their characters are well known, and it gives us encouragement that we too can become the one that Jesus loved. And that's pretty special. And of James as well. There's several Jameses in the New Testament. It can be confusing. It has to be specified. He was a fisherman. John and James were nicknamed the sons of thunder. His mother was Salome. And John, James, and Peter formed the inner circle of Jesus. Do you remember when Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane before his passion? He left the 9, and then he went with the 3, because he figured they would pray with him. And did they? No. They were too tired. And Jesus had sympathy on them, but Jesus was getting worried about himself at that point. He wasn't afraid of the Romans or the temple guard. What Jesus was afraid of is that somehow the devil would mess up his mission and that he wouldn't be able to fulfill it. And the anxiety that he felt led to him almost dying in Gethsemane. And an angel was sent to strengthen him to go through the ordeal. And I don't think in all eternity we'll ever really understand what God went through. It's amazing to me that God would do something like sending Jesus here. 3 in 1, and yet they went without his company all those years in his childhood and in his ministry. And then they had to, metaphorically speaking, stand by and watch what became of him. And it was a sad day in heaven. Okay, let's see what we have here. Okay, a little bit more about John. Wait a minute. Are we moving ahead here, Wayne? Yes, okay. We already did some of that. Suffered hardship, persecution, many trials. We'll get to that as we go through. You know that every one of the disciples died a horrible death. Except for John. Now, he was also, they tried to kill him and they couldn't. Well, we'll explain that as we go along. By the way, that was almost like a prophecy. Jesus, when he was meeting with his disciples once, said that they would all suffer, for him. And then he didn't point out John, and Peter came and he said, "What about him, Lord?" And Jesus said, basically, it's none of your business. You do what you're called to do. And we'll see how this Emperor Domitian exiled him to Patmos when he couldn't kill him. Tradition tells us, and you can go by that as well as anything, because it goes beyond the New Testament. But tradition tells us John was thrown into a cauldron of boiling oil. He would have been cooked. And just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he swam around, but nothing happened. And so, since they couldn't kill him, they sent him to the Isle of Patmos, which is an island in the Aegean Sea. And there he was visited by the Lord in vision and visited by angels. And he was given this message that we're looking at. So let's see what we have here. During the exile, John was given the revelation and began to write its message. I think this also tells us that, in 96 AD, Emperor Nerva, so the one that tried to kill him was Domitian. During Domitian's reign, they killed a lot of Christians. It was not all the Caesars were that harsh. And so Emperor Nerva came to the throne and he sent John back home. Where did John go? Does anybody remember what history tells us? Pardon me? He went back to Ephesus. He was the pastor. And so he took up his responsibilities again. And Let me see. John returned to Ephesus to finish the writing of the Revelation message before he died. So Revelation is late in its writing. He was doing it during 96 AD. Probably wasn't finished for a while, but it's almost into the 2nd century before the book of Revelation comes along. The book of Revelation, we're going to get to a lot of things about it, but it's the appropriate book to end the New Testament with. People often wonder, why are the books organized the way that they are? The Old Testament is broken up into different segments. You have the law, the prophets, and the writings. The law are the books of Moses. The prophets are, you know what they are, the major prophets and minor prophets. And then you have the writings, like Chronicles and Job and 1 Kings, 2 Kings, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. And in the New Testament, you have the Gospels. Then you have the book of Acts, which ought to be right there where it is. And then you have the different writings, Paul's writings. Paul wrote a third of the New Testament. So he was considerable. Paul has got, if you're a really strong Christian, Paul has got to be your hero. I mean, he faced everything. I mean, he went through everything that a man could go through. And he has places in his writings where he talks about that, the things that have happened to him. And the worst thing that he said could happen to him was being betrayed by fellow Christians. And that happened too. You know, a stab in the back is always worse than seeing it coming. So, let's see. By the way, Revelation was not the last book of the Bible. John wrote his gospel after the book of Revelation. And that's fascinating. Because John's book is different than the other three. Have you noticed that? The three are, yeah, that's right. They're all similar. And Mark was the oldest, and the others depended on Mark's to get their start and to flesh out the Gospels. But John's was totally different. Totally different. Most of John's Gospel is taken up with the Passion of the Christ, the last week of his life. We find in John 11, of course, the experience of Lazarus' resurrection, which is the greatest miracle Jesus performed, wasn't it? He did it in public, in front of the Pharisees and the scribes, and that was proof that he was the Messiah, because only God can give life. The devil and his kinds and his demons, they can't give life. All they can do is take it. Okay, where are we going here? All right, he died of natural causes. So we move ahead. The book for today, for sure, Revelation is also called the Apocalypse. The meaning is to disclose. And I don't want to go into it at greater length. In the book of Revelation, there are 404 verses. I found this fascinating. 278 of them are alluded to in other books of the Bible. That's why I think it belongs at the end of the Bible. The subject of it belongs at the end, because it takes us beyond the book of Acts, doesn't it? It picks up what Acts didn't carry on, if you will. And it talks about the churches, and the 7 churches are fascinating. They were, I don't want to go into it in great detail because he touches on it here, but they were rather limited on their location. They were kind of in the middle of Asia Minor, along what's thought to be the postal road, where packages and letters and stuff like that were dropped off by officials of the Roman Empire. Let's see, we're going on here? Practical application. Okay, there's practical application also, and there's a number of them here that I thought that we'd take a look at. And what does it mean to each of us, and what does it mean for all of us? Each of the churches, of the 7 churches, were literal. They were literal churches, and the things that were said to them had to do with their present situation. But then it also goes above and beyond that. And if it doesn't get to it here, I'll throw it in at the end. But we'll see where it goes here. The 7 churches, the places, Asia Minor circumstances are there. How can the prophecies of Revelation be relevant to us? That's a good question. That is a good question. Okay, that is... Okay. Step 1. This is good. That's what I was looking for. What the text meant to the original audience. That's why I mentioned about the things that are in the churches. The book of Laodicea is an interesting book. The things that Jesus says to that church had meaning to them, not just as a church family, but also for the place that they were located in. And it's going to be that same for all 7 of them. We're not going to go through them all. But this shows you how to study the Bible, and particularly the book of Revelation, which is, of course, an integral part of the Scriptures. What does the author say, and why does he say it? These are questions that pastors, when they're preparing sermons, go through. We can't stand up in front of people and talk about things that we haven't studied out, and this is one way of doing it. And you're looking for the things between the lines as well as those things that are written. Understanding the social setting, we touched on that, linguistic, literary, historical, religious, geographical, philosophical, and cultural. Okay, now that's for the past. What the text means to the reader today. Well, the book of Revelation means a lot to me. And I'm sure it's becoming a lot for you as well. They're prophetic messages, aren't they? 2 Peter 1, verses 19 through 21 tells us, and we have something more sure, the prophetic word, to which you will do well to pay attention as to a lamp shining in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star shines into your hearts. Knowing this first, that of all, that no prophecy of Scripture comes from someone's own interpretation. I'm going to touch on that in a minute too. For no prophecy has ever been produced by the will of man, but men spoke from God as they were carried along by the Holy Spirit. That last phrase here is one that authenticates the concept of inspiration. Some people say, well, men wrote the Bible and, they could say anything. But what did they write that became the Bible? What the Holy Spirit moved upon them to write. So, a couple of years ago, I think it was, I preached a sermon here on the concept of inspiration. And God doesn't work on the words. He works on the writer. And the writer expresses in his own words what God showed him. And that's the process of inspiration. And so we'll move ahead here. I wasn't sure because I haven't been able to go through this whole thing on the screen, but I've been going through it on the computer. So I was glad that they had 2 Peter on there because I'd written it out. This way I don't have to. All right, let's move ahead. 4 methods of prophecy interpretation. This is good. Steve touched on this the other day. Let me see, where is it? It's right here. I did a little bit of research. He talked about these people, but maybe it got past you. It would be easy to get past it. Did anybody remember what he said preterism was? He kind of explains it here. It was... Has anybody ever heard of the Council of Trent? Or the Counter-Reformation? I don't know if Steve mentioned that. I mean, we touched on these things. But at the Council of Trent was an attempt by the Catholic Church to reinterpret the Bible, if you will. They were getting killed. I mean, evangelistically. The Protestant Reformation was expanding exponentially, and that's what this council was about. And one of the And it lasted quite a long time. But one of the things that happened there was the institution of the, let me see here. It was the institution of substituting prophecy so that it didn't point towards the Roman Church. Yeah. And it was the institution of the Jesuits that began the process. And two Jesuits, I'm going to mention their names here because it isn't on this screen, were particularly effective at being able to do this. And preterism is one of the methods. You remember Steve mentioning that. It was Jesuit Alcazar that came up with this concept. And what he did was say that the prophecies were referring to the Roman Empire before their time. And that was in 1580 that they came up with this. So if it was all in the past and it wasn't in the present, what does that do? That takes away the possibility of the Pope of Rome being involved in this. And so they did him a favor. Now another one is idealism. That's a method of interpretation that's popular in some of the mainline churches, where they don't really believe in predictive prophecy, and they basically say there's no historical purpose for the symbols of Revelation. They're allegorical. You understand that? They're allegories. They're not real things. And then we come up with futurism, which you've also heard about, because I know Steve mentioned that. This one was developed by Jesuit Ribera. And the idea here is that all of the serious prophecies are in the future. They're not in the past. They're not in the present. They're in the future. And so none of it's happened yet. So we can speculate and we can try to make things fit as best that we would in order to do that. Then we come up with, let me see. Why am I not getting, there it is, historicism. It says historical, but historicism is usually the way it's referenced. This is what I believe and what this church believes, because we didn't invent it. It came right off the pages of Scripture itself, and it was championed by all of the reformers. All of them. And so we feel like we're in good company in that regard. Historicist means that interpreting the prophecies is that they all of them move towards a convergence of truth and error and the conflict between Christ and Satan through humanity and through life here on planet Earth. They're all moving continually. Now, I keep getting tempted to get ahead of myself, so I'm going to try to hang on to myself, and if it doesn't come through here, then I will add something to it. Historical biblical is another way to reference it. Revelation provides a symbolic prophetic outline for the apostles and to the end of time. Now, we have a number of sequences in the book of Revelation. Can anybody tell me what the primary number is in the book of Revelation? 7. 7 churches. 7 trumpets. 7 seals. You know, you keep going on. And what these are each one. You remember when Steve was talking to us about the book of Daniel? This is why he starts off with the book of Daniel before we get here. Because without Daniel, you're just making it up. And that's what a lot of people do. I thought it was interesting back in the early 70s became a Christian. I remember Hal Lindsey's books, the late great Planet Earth. Do you remember that? A few years later, when you get to the 80s and the 90s, particularly in the 90s, he changed it on its head. And he said that Saddam Hussein was the Antichrist. How did that work out? And this is the way it happens. When you're speculating, you're going by newspapers. You're not going by the Bible. And you're going to keep coming up with changes. And after a while, you don't have any credibility. Nobody's going to believe you. And that's sad, because the Bible is important and the messages that are in it. And so what you have here in Revelation, it's rooted in the book of Daniel with its sequential history. You can see history from the time of the early church on down to the end. It's a continuation, if you will, of the book of Acts. And the symbolism is all related to that. So I don't want to take too much of your time, but let's move ahead here. He told me it was going to take 15 minutes to do this, and there's 47 slides. Explain to me how I can do that, but I'm going to try not to be redundant here. Organization of Revelation, there's a half that's historical, with the 7 churches, for instance, the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, and the great controversy vision of chapters 11 through 14, and then the end of probation. So remember that you had the different symbols that were in the book of Daniel, where you had the image with the different metals, you had the animals, the different ones that represented different nations, and then in Daniel, I think it's Daniel 8, you get into more animals of a different nature. They're getting closer and closer to that time. So, in similar vein, we have all these repetitions here. And they all look at church history from a different viewpoint. And I think that's helpful to remember that. And so let's see if we can get further on down the road. How is it organized? The end time half. Because he's warning his people as to what's coming so that we can be ready. And you have the 7 last plagues in there. You have the fall of Babylon, all of which we've seen, because Steve's given it in his messages. The millennium, which is 1,000 years. The New Jerusalem. And where are we next? 7 trumpets are 7 judgments sent to warn the wicked. Let me see, did I skip over? Let me see. 7 last plagues. No, I didn't. Okay, let's move ahead. And we can see this. The 7 churches are evident. These are different epochs of the literal church. And it's very interesting. If you study it from that perspective, you immediately, if you know anything about history, you'll recognize it right there. There are different periods in church history. There's the period of persecution that went on. There's the period when the church was very, very powerful and was actually breaking down the walls of hell, really. I mean, they were doing a great job. And then came along the persecutions, and then came the corruption. It was almost as if Satan couldn't do anything about the success of the church, and so he joined the church. Okay, as one author said. Where are we at here? Okay, so and the trumpets represent 7 judgments sent to warn the wicked to change their ways. Very fascinating. There's also a succession of events that take place in history. Wayne, what am I doing wrong? I'm pointing at that instead of this. I think that's what the problem is. Okay. The 7 last plagues are also severe judgments sent to punish the unrepentant wicked. Now, this is near the time of the end. By the way, I don't know if you noticed it or not, there are 7 last plagues. Do you know that 5 of them were plagues on Egypt? Egypt is an interesting subject in prophecy. Very, very interesting. You have the king of the north and the king of the south. The king of the south is Egypt, Pharaoh. King of the north is the king of Babylon. Very interesting. Everything that's in the Bible helps you to understand the book of Revelation. You can't cut it off and say, I'm just a New Testament person. New Testament is preeminent. As one theologian said, without the New Testament, you don't know who the Messiah is. Wayne, you might remember this from seminary. But he said, without the Old Testament, you don't know what it means. And so that's where we're headed here. 7 last plagues. So we'll go on. And Old Testament references and allusions. I think we touched on this, did we not? Yeah, I think we did. I'm not sure why. Repetitive structure. Use of the number 7s. Chiastic structure. This is fascinating. Let me help you with this. Anybody have heard of a chiasm? Some of you have. Okay, it's a literary device that's used by other writers in order to organize thoughts. A chiasm is a double list of related items to which the order of the second list is opposite to the order of the first list. It's like you start off with A at the top and A prime at the bottom. You come to B at the top and B prime at the bottom. You come to C at the top and then C at the bottom, and then what's in the middle? What's in the middle is the most important thought. If you think of the Lord's Prayer, it's a chiasm. I was trying to work this out because a lot of people don't believe that thine is the kingdom, the glory, and the power forever and ever. It doesn't belong there. It turns out that Luke doesn't include that, but Matthew does. And when you take Matthew's, you'll see that the first 3 are about God, and the last 3 are about our needs, and right in the middle is what you would expect. What would be the heart? What would be the heart of the Lord's Prayer? Forgiveness. And if you take out that last part that Luke didn't include, and Luke wasn't a witness to Jesus, he was a writer that came along to try to put together a story of the Gospels and the book of Acts. And so in like manner, we have a chiasm here in the book of Revelation. Let's see. If we divide Revelation at the end of chapter 14 into 2 halves, and then divide each half into separate divisions, we can find related pairs of content. These pairs go in opposite directions. It's organized like a mirror image. Chiastic structure of the book of Revelation. I know they have an outline of it in here. Now they've just got some more commentary. 2 major groups. The first half deals primarily with the experience of God's people during the Christian era. This is called the Christian half. The second deals with almost exclusively with the last day events and is called the end half. Now let me see here. Maybe it's not until we get to the, okay. The historical half covers all of human history. Therefore, it has not been completely fulfilled yet because not all Christian history has happened yet. For example, the 7th seal, 7th trumpet, final scene in the great controversy, division, all are still waiting for their fulfillment. This is what excites us about the book of Revelation. This is why it matters. Because we're living within the continuum of the book of Revelation, and we haven't got all of it yet. But because we can look back and we can see how it's been true all down through history, it gives me confidence that what we haven't yet seen is true. Now let's see what they get. I can't wait till they get to the actual chiastic structure here. Okay, let's go past that. Literary structure. Okay. Sanctuary scenes. The entire book is a sanctuary typology. Revelation 1 through 11 correlates with the daily Old Testament sacrifice service there. Correlates with the annual Day of Judgment in Revelation 12:22, and the Day of Atonement is what it's called. And let's see. This is it. Oh yeah, this is great. Let me see. All right. They're going through the sanctuary scenes here. We need to move along so you guys can get to working here. Ministry in the sanctuary. We've seen this. Steve took us through the significance of all the different items in the Old Testament sanctuary, and they all represent realities in heaven. Let's see here. Introductory sanctuary scene. You're aware, you've read the book of Revelation. You noticed from chapter 1 that Jesus is walking among what? Candlesticks, exactly. That's right. There's 7 of them for the 7 churches. Okay, and they all have significance. Turned to see the voice that spoke to me, and having turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. There we go. Let me move along here. Introduction to the sanctuary scenes. The 7 seals. Let me see. Okay, the significant part of this is the door standing open in heaven. And the first voice which I heard was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, "Come up here, and I will show you things which must take place after this." Immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne set in heaven. By the way, the one that Moses built was built after the model that was in the temple of heaven. And somebody asked, and we didn't have a chance to really comment on it, whether the Ark of the Covenant is still intact. We believe that it is. Jeremiah hid it just before Babylon took over Israel, and it's still there. It'll be the greatest archaeological discovery when it comes. And there have been some really, the last 3 or 4 years have been amazing, one after another of things that reinforce the Bible. They found a piece of lead that had been written on that was under the altar on Mount Ebal. Now, I'm not going to go great length. You might remember that was the mountain of curses, and then Mount Gerizim was the mountain of blessings. And so nobody paid attention to Mount Ebal. And they went and found this thing, and it's the oldest artifact ever having the Hebrew name for God. Yahweh. It's clear. It's right on there. And that takes you back to the time of Joshua. One of the biggest hits on Christians believing in the Bible is that the Exodus, there's no evidence for the Exodus. But it's coming. Let's see. Jesus opens these seals. And that's part of the commentary there too. Okay, the sanctuary, let me see, introductory sanctuary scene, belonging to the 7 trumpets. Okay, let's go through this. And I want to get to where they have the slide that has the outline on it. Oh, come on. Let's get there. I'm way past my time anyway. I know it's here. New Jerusalem, okay. Holy City coming down out of heaven. God prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. A loud voice saying, "Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men." Okay. The heavenly temple is the center of all divine activity. All actions on earth proceed from the temple in heaven because God is in charge. Does that make sense? Yeah. When we talk about the sanctuary here, when people are talking about rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem, I don't know if they'll ever do it or not. If they did, it would cause a religious war like we've never seen, because it's a holy place for the Muslims also, on the Dome of the Rock. But nonetheless, even if they did, it wouldn't matter. What does it mean? Jesus came and died on the cross. What would it mean to kill hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of animals? Let's see. Oh, come on. Where is that slide? I want to finish with that. Oh, let me see. Okay. I'll go ahead. Wayne, what did I do wrong? I'm pointing it right at it and it's not moving. So. Help me out. This is his equipment, so I'd let him figure it out. That can't be the end, because they haven't had the chiastic structure. There you go. Anyway, what the author does here is he shows you the chiastic nature of the book of Revelation, which is really, really cool. Is that it? Okay. It's online, but it didn't get on there somehow. I apologize. And you have the top and the bottom and the center pointed out on that. And I was okay. All right. Let's we got to the end here. Give me a second here, and I'll see if I can bring it up. I can at least give it to you verbally. Okay, there it is. Okay. Okay. Let's see, it's got to be way down here. Give me just a second. Oh, there it is. Oh. No. That's not it. This is a shame. Does this thing ever come to an end? No. Okay, I know I didn't skip it on the screen, and I thought we had everything transferred. But it shows you how the beginning and the ending of the book of Revelation all comes together, and what it is that's in the center. But let me encourage you to study through. It might be something honored in your lesson, and if not, we'll make it up to you. We'll figure a way to be able to do that. So let me have a word of prayer with you as we shut this down and we move along. Father in heaven, it's a good thing to be able to see things on the screen and to be able to understand them and explain them, but it's even better for us to discover those things with our Bibles in our hands, with our questions in the page, and answering those questions and filling them in is a thrilling experience. And I pray that you be with everyone here tonight as they continue doing their work. And then we'll finish this up in Jesus' name.